So the real question to ask is not whether good or bad artificial intelligence will steal my job. Is modern society, and its leaders along with it, ready to handle this technological revolution? Do they even have a damn clue what's going on? That's the question they should be asking themselves, because they don't get it. Someone should go knock on their door and say, "Hello, it's coming." Fears are entirely legitimate in the face of such an epochal and significant change. In general, the human brain is naturally afraid of any kind of change. That's why we always look for our comfort zone, right? Because we don't like change. The human brain works through stereotypes, meaning it tries to identify the situation around it, which is made up of millions of variables, and immediately tries to simplify it and relate it to a familiar situation. Then it hits the play button and activates the behavior it knows will work in that situation. This is how our brain works, and also our psyche. It's clear that when you are faced with a scenario that is, so to speak, unknown, or that in any case involves epochal changes, and artificial intelligence is certainly one of these, it's normal to be afraid. We all are, and that's right. It's absolutely right to be. And first of all, I really want to confirm that this is, in fact, I'm quite certain, the greatest technological revolution humanity has ever experienced, much greater even than the Industrial Revolution. And so, as a consequence, it will have an impact in terms of change on everything, on the way we live, on our society, right? The very way we interact with each other, and clearly also even more so in the world of work. So it's understandable that people are scared. And what can we say? What will happen? Well, first of all, when there are these major changes, history teaches us that there are challenges, but there are also opportunities, right? Simply put, in the world of business and the market, when everything is flat and nothing happens, it's hard for a new company to emerge and gain ground. Positions are won when there are changes, and someone is better at navigating and taking advantage of those changes. So I don't see why it should be any different this time. One thing I always say is that your competitor, your opponent, whether you're an employee, a company, or you're in a certain type of business, is not artificial intelligence itself, but rather someone who will use artificial intelligence, especially if you don't use it. So it's a bit like getting ready to learn how to surf this enormous, powerful tsunami wave of changes that's coming, rather than getting hit by that wave head on. Another important thing that needs to be clarified right away, because the tendency obviously is to disparage technology, or even worse, to act like ostriches, right? To stick your head in the sand like ostriches. Technological revolutions don't stop. It's like, I don't know, when the steam engine was invented, someone saying, no, we can't do this because people who raise horses will lose their jobs. It's not possible. There simply isn't a button to turn off a technological revolution. So you really have no choice but to get ready and learn how to ride it. It's clear that there will be changes in the world of work as well. Some jobs will disappear. There will be new jobs that emerge, and some jobs will change. I don't know, let's try to give some examples. I mean, of course, if you write software by hand, typing out every instruction, and then you try to run it and it gives you a core dump because you forgot a semicolon somewhere, you'd better get ready, because the world is changing. Now it's artificial intelligence that writes the software. This doesn't mean you won't have a job anymore, because your job might be to validate the software written by artificial intelligence or to properly instruct the AI to write the software that's needed. It's a bit like at the beginning of the 1900s when you drove stagecoaches and had a thriving business because people needed to travel by stagecoach. Then Henry Ford came along. So what do? Well, either you open a gas station or you learn to drive a car, because if you keep driving stagecoaches, before long you won't have a job anymore. So these are more or less the dynamics at play. Then, the concern that artificial intelligence might replace more jobs than it creates, well, it's right to have that concern. It should also be said that ever since the world began, or at least in this latest advanced evolved civilization, we don't know about the ones before, the arrival of advanced technologies has, in the end, on balance, added jobs rather than taken them away. I mean, you could very easily make the same argument if I think about my grandparents who lived in the Po Valley. When you drive along the highways that cross the plain, you very often see these groups of old crumbling brick houses just sitting there right in the middle of the fields, right? You know, and what are those houses? Those are the houses of the 5 or 6 family groups who used to farm the land and had to live in the middle of the fields because the only way in the morning was to wake up, walk a kilometer, or ride a horse-drawn cart and start working the land. They couldn't afford to live 30 kilometers away in the city. And then Giovannino came along and started making tractors. So now those houses are in ruins because, of course, people no longer live in the middle of the fields. They live in the city. So we need to understand what has changed. But someone still has to make the tractors, someone has to drive them, and someone has to maintain them. In short, it's a big change, and we'll have to see how things turn out. Let's also keep in mind other things. For example, we are a population that is growing rapidly on a global scale. So we need to find more efficient ways to work and manage the resources we have. Otherwise, quite simply, there won't be enough room for us on this planet, and we can't go on with one part of the population living at the expense of another, basically leeching off their resources, because sooner or later these issues will come to a head. And we, as a Southern European country, if we don't understand this, it's because we're really being stubborn. Because, come on, Mimo, all you have to do is look south, and every other day a dinghy arrives. But it's not like the dinghy arrives because over there there's nothing to eat, while over here maybe we eat too much. So, in short, there are many dynamics to take into account. I wouldn't blame a technology that in any case can't be stopped. You can't say that gunpowder is bad just because you can make bombs with it. Because if someone is digging tunnels for highways, if they had to dig them with a pickaxe, would the pickaxe be the bad thing? No, it's the gunpowder. It's the person who uses the technology who determines, let's say, its reputation, right?
I was thinking, Max, in this epochal revolution, which is truly a transformative period in our history, would you say that once again, as has sometimes happened in past revolutions, the future balance of jobs created will ultimately be positive overall? Because as a layperson, though I do work in this field, this time it seems to me, I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but it seems, I don't know, I feel like this time the balance will be negative because those jobs could be done by other artificial intelligences.
I understand, Mimo, and I have the same feeling as you do. But I repeat, it won't depend on the technology itself, but on how we use it and on how society is able to evolve in harmony with technology. In other words, one thing all these technological revolutions teach us is that in the end, society changes with the advent of technology. I mean, at school, they made us study the Industrial Revolution, right? People moved from the countryside to the cities, and the very structure of society changed a lot. Workers were born with all the good and bad that came with it, right? I mean, maybe you no longer died from the cold because you lived in the city, but so to speak, you became a slave to your employer. So this isn't a problem with technology, it's a problem with society. We need to understand how society will evolve, and it must evolve because otherwise it will really become a serious problem. Let me give you an example, Mimo, a positive example, and then we'll look at the negative side. In 2 or 3 years, those who can afford it, that is, those who today are able to buy a panda, for instance, will be able to afford a humanoid robot at home that does the housework, takes care of all the usual household tasks, including cooking, grocery shopping, and so on, handling many daily chores and responsibilities, because this is the level of technology we're talking about. Well, obviously, it could also work, for example, in a factory, let's say assembling the Fiat Panda, just to give you an example, instead of an employee. And someone might say, so the employee doesn't work anymore and ends up starving. Well, that's a negative way of looking at things. The employee doesn't work anymore, starves, and the factory owner makes more money because they no longer have to pay the employee. Just buy the robot and then don't have to think about it for 20 years. Every now and then you change the oil, the batteries, and that's it. If society stays the way it is, yes, but if society were to change, if the gains from productivity and work efficiency were shared, then maybe instead of spending 8 or 9 hours assembling bumpers on the assembly line, you'd only spend 4 hours maybe supervising the work or running tests to improve the quality of the cars, and the other 4 hours you could spend at home with your family, with your standard of living unchanged. Because who is it that guarantees that part of your standard of living that you don't lose, even though you're not working as much anymore? It's the productivity and efficiency brought by technology. But that gain has to come to you. If it only goes to the owner, or so you see, it's a problem of society and social organization, not a problem of technology. Technology in itself provides an advantage. If you put yourself in the shoes of someone who uses robots or artificial intelligence to do a job better, faster, and at a lower cost, it's an advantage. But if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who loses their job, it's a disadvantage. It's society that should rebalance these things. Then it's also society that should manage these transitions. I mean, when Henry Ford came along and, I don't know, a few 100,000 stagecoach drivers found themselves unemployed over the course of 20 years, I don't know if anything was done for them or if they were just left to starve. Today, clearly, there will be some generations that can adapt. In other words, if you're 40 years old today, you're going to get hit full force by this industrial revolution. And if you're a software developer at 40, you'd better study day and night because you won't make it to retirement as a software developer. No. Society, the state should manage this transition. Like, I don't know, the most ridiculous thing, they make you take training courses where you learn to create AI agents, not to develop websites in Python or JavaScript, because those will be done by artificial intelligence controlled by thought. I don't know if I've made myself clear. So the real question to ask is not whether good or bad artificial intelligence will steal my job. Is modern society, and its leaders along with it, ready to handle this technological revolution? Do they even have a damn clue what's going on? That's the question they should be asking, because if they haven't understood, someone should knock and say, hello, it's coming.
It will also be interesting to note that if the entrepreneur converts their production line thanks to artificial intelligence and lays people off, replaces them, and so on, who is going to buy what the entrepreneur produces? In my opinion, that's where the balance will be.
Exactly, that's where the balance is. Unfortunately, today there are already so many imbalances even without artificial intelligence. Look at the mess that's happening. That's happening right now in terms of global worldwide trade. There are people who haven't understood that supply creates demand, not the other way around. I mean, You see, it's not that supply comes if there's demand. So if there is supply, if there is production, demand will follow. If there is no production, there can't be any demand because there are no goods to buy. So you always have to focus on production. Well, artificial intelligence is a godsend for production because it will help produce everything at a lower cost, more efficiently, and above all, it will allow us to do things that, honestly, and I could give you an endless list of examples, we're used to seeing only in science fiction movies. And yet today they are real, reality in fact, but a reality that we will see in our homes within a reasonable time frame of 2, 3, 4, or at most 5 years. So we are facing a truly incredible change. Am I worried about anything? Yes, I'm genuinely worried because I truly fear that our modern society, as well as modern leadership, are absolutely not ready or prepared at all to handle this situation.
Max, I wanted to ask you a question related to what you're currently dealing with or studying in the field. Is there something that really excites you a lot? And on the other hand, something that at the extreme opposite really scares you, even in hyperbole, even paradoxically?
Yes, yes.
I know these are questions.
Yes, there is. There is. And the answer to both questions is the same thing. That is, the same thing excites me a lot and scares me a lot. And artificial intelligence has already shown us, it has already proven to us, and so there is little doubt about what I'm about to say, that it is, as they say in English, cracking, meaning in this case it is solving the biological mysteries of life. In other words, artificial intelligence has already, and quite possibly potentially, turned what used to be a science of discoveries. I'm talking about the life sciences such as medicine and biology into a science of engineering, of thoughtful, intentional design. We will no longer talk about medical discoveries, but about medical design, because artificial intelligence is allowing us to make a leap forward, probably by centuries, in our understanding of the biological mechanisms that govern life. And this is something truly exciting. I can give you some really amazing examples. The most well-known one, known to everyone, is one that I also included it for work reasons in a video you can find on my YouTube channel, the one with Max Caranzano, Not Before Us, in 2020, a model created by DeepMind from Google, a group of these were people who, until the day before, had created models that beat humans at the most complex games, poker and so on. And they got hooked on this thing also because the founder and head of DeepMind is a neuroscientist. They hired a biologist. In short, Trice and Branca came up with a model that within a few months managed to code every protein present on the planet, 200 million proteins. This gave humanity an infinite leap forward in the knowledge of life sciences and biology. They all won the Nobel Prize. Today, you can download this model from the internet, run it on a couple of hardware pieces, and in a lab, it designs proteins to create a new drug. So, do you realize what we will actually be able to accomplish and achieve over the course of the next decade? I mean, we're talking about some really major and significant things here. Things that could truly change the world as we know it. You know, this goes far beyond just potentially being able to cure diseases. It includes making advances in health technology and the quality of life. Being able to, we're talking about extending life, for example, you know. We're talking about escape life velocity, so what we really mean is an increasingly detailed, comprehensive, and profoundly deep understanding of exactly how these complex biological mechanisms actually work. For example, the mechanism of aging leads many to say that within a reasonable span of 5 or 6 years, we'll be able to significantly slow it down, if not stop it altogether. Shall we talk about the philosophical implications for society? Because technology will make this happen. As a technologist and almost 60 years old myself, I'm enthusiastic about these things. I mean, if someone tells you ready, set, go, I'll give you another 30 years of healthy life, I'll fix the problems you already have, and so on, who would say no to that? This is another one of the big problems. This technological revolution is moving so fast that, besides not being understood by those who should understand it, the legislative mechanisms to regulate it are so slow that, honestly, they are almost useless. You see what I mean? Everything I've just talked to you about is already an established reality, not widespread, but established. Let me tell you.
But even the political and social reality could improve. I mean, paradoxically, even dishonesty or injustice should be drastically reduced because processes are managed by intelligences. At least I hope so.
You've touched on a fantastic point. Paulo already knows what I'm about to say now. But first, let me tell you something technical. Artificial intelligence isn't actually intelligent. It's just good at doing one thing. It's good at identifying patterns in a huge, confusing sea of data. And the bigger the sea of data, the more it's obviously able to find patterns that we humans wouldn't be able to find because we simply don't have the sensors, the computing power. We're just lacking. Our brains they're not powerful enough. Our eyes aren't powerful enough. They're limited. As I always say, our senses are fallible. They're very limited. That is, an artificial intelligence isn't limited to seeing only what we see. It can see data in infrared, in X-rays, any kind of data. It can hear any frequency of sound. It can analyze any type of data, and it can do so at unimaginable speeds. So it has this incredible ability to find patterns within this enormous mountain of data, right? Just think, they immediately applied this to medicine. But even with the most basic things, like you have the result of a CT scan or an ultrasound, and then you have the doctor who, based on their experience and what we've learned, tries to guess what the hell is going on, right? But artificial intelligence is vastly better at doing that job than the doctor is. The only reason they don't let artificial intelligence do it on its own yet is an ethical one, because if it makes a mistake, who do you blame? If the doctor makes a mistake, it's not a big deal, right? In other words, tests have been conducted where a number of clinical cases were given to artificial intelligence, to a team of doctors, and to a team of doctors using artificial intelligence, and they showed that artificial intelligence alone is by far better than the others, even better than the group of doctors with artificial intelligence. Do you know what that tells us? That we are a degrading factor in reasoning. In other words, if you add the human component, you degrade the performance. The same thing has been discovered in autonomous vehicle driving. At the beginning, Tesla's systems and those of others were trained by writing on the image. Pedestrian, bicycle, car, so basically it was a mix of human rules and real-world images. They reached a certain point and then couldn't improve any further. That is, every now and then this artificial intelligence would hit a pole, run someone over, they just couldn't make it any better. At a certain point, they removed the human component and started feeding it only videos from the cameras of cars driving around. Boom! It became much safer and much more efficient. So the human component is actually a degrading factor in this situation. Anyway, going back to this discussion about patents, What they're doing now is they're not feeding it images anymore. For example, they're giving it readings of people's brain electromagnetic fields. Like when they give you an electroencephalogram, they put that cap with all the sensors on your head, and then they measure your brain activity when you turn the light on, when you turn it off. And then there's someone who really does this and says, damn, you seem healthy. You might suffer from, I don't know, epilepsy, or maybe you've had a stroke and so on. But that's all they can do, because with that flood of signals going up and down, what more do you expect them to do? Well, now they've had artificial intelligence do this. I've looked at least 7, 8, maybe 10 projects around the world that use more or less the same technique, and they're all at a very advanced stage. Artificial intelligence, in this chaos of electromagnetic signals emitted by our brain, is basically able to read your thoughts. What do I mean by reading your mind? What am I trying to say? I don't know. I mean that if I show you the image of a person and you look at it, artificial intelligence, by measuring and interpreting the electromagnetic fields generated by your brain, redraws that person on a computer screen. And I can guarantee you it's her. If you think of a well-known person, if you focus and think of Alessandra, it draws Alessandra for you. If you read a sentence in your mind, it writes out the sentence but with an 80% success rate. Okay?
That's amazing.
You mentioned the processes and all that stuff. Do you remember Minority Report?
Exactly.
That's it.
I was expecting that.
There was an interview with Elon Musk just a few hours ago where he stated that this year, I think 20 or 30 blind people, even those blind from birth, so people who have always been blind, will regain their sight with these systems. Why? Because now there are models that, given 2 cameras, are able to recognize any object that appears in front of these cameras. And so, once any object is recognized, if you know what signal the brain emits when it sees a bicycle or when it sees an animal, then if you wanted to see an animal or an object, you do the reverse process. You generate that electrical signal in the brain. And so they have replaced the eyes, which basically do just that. They receive visual impulses and, with the retina, transform them into electrical impulses. They have replaced this function. And this year, the first 20 or 30 patients will regain their sight thanks to these systems. And even more than that, nowadays there are robotic systems for people who have lost a limb and so on, which are controlled by the mind, by thought. It's amazing. Have you seen a video of it? Now, the only issue left is really just the mass production, so to speak. But I mean, I've even shown them to Paulo divers, Now, the robotic hand for the poor unfortunate kid who lost his hand as a child and would have faced a life of disability, well, now he'll have a life like Luke Skywalker with a robotic hand, because that's the reality now. That's how it is. And even more, in this interview, Elon Musk was crazy stuff, really crazy. He was saying, with a very high probability, in 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to fix much more serious problems. People who have broken their backs and are paralyzed. And with the same technique, we can fix that too, because the brain is still sending the commands to move the legs and so on, but the electrical cable is broken. And he says, what's the problem? We just put the plugs in after it's broken and bypass it completely. He called it bridging, right? We bypass the break in the electrical cable with a technological system, of course, So you'll have a device that reads the thought from your brain that control your muscles. Before, the commands to the muscles weren't getting through, but now you make them arrive mechanically, electronically, which is exactly what you do with a robotic arm today, right? It's exactly the same thing.
Neuralink is building brain-computer interfaces. The first part is called telepathy. It allows someone who has lost the use of their body to control a computer or a phone just by thinking.
Wow.
In fact, you can interact with several people who are doing this online right now. They're on the X platform. You can DM them, I think, and they'll reply just by thinking. They're not typing anything.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then there's a second Neuralink device, very similar to the first one, called Blind Sight, which will enable people who are blind to see, including those who have been blind from birth.
Wow.
It will interface directly with the visual cortex in the brain, and hopefully we'll be able to do the first blind sight implant in a human later this year. Within the next 12 months, I'd say I'm quite confident that we can do that. And then I also think it's quite likely, if not almost certain, that we'll be able to enable someone with a severed spinal cord to walk again by taking the signals from the brain, bridging them over the damaged section of the spine, and reactivating the nerves beyond the break. You can just think of it as if some wires got broken, and if you can bridge the signals, your body will work again.
Amazing.
So yeah, there are some very exciting things happening in that area.
So just imagine, really take a moment to think about what a groundbreaking technology like this could truly mean for us all. That's exactly what excites me so much, Mimi. What scares me
Yes.
is that when you control the engineering of life, you can create a serum that cures type 1 diabetes, but you can also make a deadly virus, right? And when this technology becomes public domain, well, I would have some concerns about that too. What do you think?
It's quite likely, in fact, there's a strong possibility that this is the case, and it seems very probable overall.
But let's start. It's the same argument as with jobs. There's really no point, technology that destroys us, looking back, It's coming, you can't stop it, you have to get ready, and that's what we should be discussing today. Those of you who still watch the news or read the newspaper, this is what should be on the front page. What the hell are we going to do to regulate these things? But instead, what does it say? Let's arm ourselves to defend against the Russians. That's why I say society isn't ready.
But as for the whole jobs issue, let's say, honestly, I'm actually a bit less worried about that particular aspect, mainly because it's not exactly... The problem isn't really tied to technology, as you said well, Max. The point is, you travel through the Po Valley and you see the old farmhouses that are crumbling and abandoned. All those farmers are no longer needed, because if before a farmhouse required staff for 30 or 40 people, now just 1 or 2 are enough to do the same work, and the productivity is the same, if not even higher in terms of harvest probably.
Higher, because today, despite all the injustices and inequalities in this world, there are 8 billion of us on the planet, and we are here as 8 billion. I mean, I was looking at the beginning of the 1900s, there were 1.5 billion of us. So technology has brought prosperity. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have reached 7 billion, right? Now, the fact that this prosperity is unevenly distributed, well, those are the problems we need to solve, not blaming technology itself.
The problem, the real issue, is one of resource distribution. Artificial intelligence will certainly enable better production technology, most likely. I mean, it will make things possible even in fields that are quite unimaginable, but also in areas where theoretical expertise is required, something we've never really seen before, like a white-collar worker, a For example, as you mentioned, medical diagnoses are already being performed by artificial intelligence.
But also, in my opinion, a certain democratization as well. Let me give you an example that you just mentioned. If you live today in a remote village, say even in a developed African country like Kenya, but you're not in Nairobi, you're in one of those villages where people raise a couple of goats, grow a few crops, and so on. Maybe you have the equipment to do an ultrasound with a nurse who can perform it even in the small clinic, but you don't have, say, a kidney disease specialist in that center, you know? Someone who is able to interpret a kidney ultrasound that was done on some poor soul who isn't feeling well, you see? So what does this poor soul do? Either they transport him to Nairobi for 200 kilometers and he arrives more dead than alive, or he dies if there's a problem that goes undiagnosed. But instead, technology will allow you to solve these problems, because at this point, all you need is a cell phone with a 4G or 5G connection to make a diagnosis using an artificial intelligence system trained with the best Western medical and scientific knowledge, even if you live in a remote village near Nairobi. So, I mean, it shouldn't always be seen in a negative light. The point is exactly what you said. It's about the distribution of benefits. If all the benefits go to a few and the disadvantages fall on the vast majority of people, which is more or less what tends to happen these days, that's not right. But that's not a problem with the technology itself.
Do you think that artificial intelligence could also be unstoppable from this point of view of wealth redistribution, that it could also escape, I want to exaggerate, the elites?
And a good question. It's a good question. I don't even dare to make a prediction. I really don't know. In some ways, developing these mega models, what are called foundational models, such as Gemini 2.5, Grok 3, and things like that, including ChatGPT, it doesn't just require putting hundreds of millions of dollars on the table. It actually requires putting billions of dollars into the process. I mean, to develop one of these hyper intelligent entities, you have to put trillions on the table. So this is a business limited to just 3 or 4 companies on the face of the planet. Some of the leading companies have already said they're pulling out of this business model because it no longer works for them. In other words, they can't keep investing billions to make the new chat Pinko Palo 6.0, and then the usage of that chat has been cut in half in terms of cost because there are so many out there now that no one uses it anymore, you know? So by now, it's something that only a very limited number of people can do. And in my opinion, as I see it, it's something that will increasingly be driven by strategic decisions rather than market ones. I mean, if you're the United States of America, you don't base your artificial intelligence infrastructure on Chinese algorithms. And if you're in China, you don't base it. And so the competition between these giants will lead to the development of, let's say, 2 or 3 hubs. I don't think there can be more than that. But then if you look at it from the other side, there's also the opposite trend, because it's a technology that's becoming more and more widespread. And for the specific task you want to assign it, it's incredibly powerful. Who says you need to create a single artificial intelligence entity that requires a nuclear power plant to train it and that answers any question you ask? If I need an artificial intelligence that interprets ultrasounds in a village in Kenya, that kind of thing will probably run on one of those boards that you can stick into a PC today for a few $100s. So we'll have to see what happens with these trends that are emerging today. We'll really have to wait and see. That's why I say it's an incredible revolution, and we should talk about it so we can ride the wave, right? It's definitely interesting. Now, think about this. We started out by developing a visual language, initially around the campfire and so on, not 11,000 years ago, as they tell us, much earlier, but we started developing a visual language. From visual language, we moved to verbal language. From verbal language to graphic language, writing. From graphic language, first phonetic, first pictographic, then phonetic, and so on. In the end, what did we develop? Mathematics, right? That's how it went in communication between humans. In communication between computers, where did we start? Did we start from mathematics? Well, Paolo, we used to program with ones and zeros. Do you remember?
Absolutely, yes, that's true. And we've gone back to a computer, to an artificial intelligence. What strikes me is that you can almost have a conversation with it like with a person. I mean, you can write to it and exactly, yes, that's surprising.
We went from the mathematics of ones and zeros, because I remember when I used to program the traffic light made with the Intel 8085, you would actually set the ones and zeros with the switches inside. Then someone came up with assembler, and after assembler there was basic C and so on. So from mathematics we moved to programming languages, and now we've gone back. And now, how do we communicate with computers thanks to artificial intelligence? We talk to them, we have conversations. In other words, artificial intelligence has broken down the barriers between computers, the digital world, and humans. Today, every person on this planet is a programmer. Before, there were 10 million programmers in the entire world. Today, every one of us, the moment you write a prompt on ChatGPT, you are programming an artificial intelligence. And how do you program it? With human language. Come on, are you telling me this isn't a revolution? I mean, your mom, Paolo, who is over 90 years old, would be able to program an artificial intelligence because she talks to it, she tells it things, I don't know.
Well, my mom talks to Alexa, which is already, it's a help in the sense that, of course, if you don't remember what day it is, for example, you can ask Alexa or it actually works.
Max, but in your opinion, let's get into a bit of speculation. Is there something you know or think that the people training these models have figured out but aren't telling us? Something they're not telling us so as not to worry the public? Is there something big going on behind the scenes, or do you think there could be that there?
No, I mean, if you only read the headlines of those things some people insist on calling newspapers, you'll never understand anything, as always. But if you use the tools available to dig deeper and expand your knowledge, you'll understand a bit more. And you understand by listening to the leaders of these 2 or 3 poles capable of developing these intelligent entities, and they themselves tell you that they are concerned. Of course, they say it with a smile, but I mean, I've heard interviews where Elon Musk says artificial intelligence is a danger, and in fact, meaning it's a real challenge, but much greater, enormously greater than the atomic threat.
I'm really very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public, and therefore there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight?
For us, for me and Paolo, who lived our youth, let's say, with the nightmare of atomic war and shelters and the day after no, what was the name of that movie? Yes, the day after. The day after. There's never more. I mean, hearing someone say that artificial intelligence is much, much, much more dangerous than that, well, I have to say that even they are a little bit worried. And we've all seen Terminator, so the concern is there. Yeah, of course, in my opinion, they're worried too. They're worried about the same things we might be worried about, that it could fall into the wrong hands or get out of control. But on the other hand, I mean, when you set up a level 4 biological lab somewhere, you might do it to study therapies to improve humanity, but there's still the risk that something could escape from that lab and wipe out half of humanity. Frankly, I would say. And who's to say that a world full of these advanced artificial intelligence entities, systems designed to think, learn, and adapt, wouldn't be able to communicate, interact, and collaborate with each other much better than we do, perhaps even in ways we can't yet imagine? I mean, who's to say that the supreme artificial intelligence made in the USA couldn't start a dialogue with the supreme intelligence made in China and together find the right compromise, the right logic, something we're not able to do? Who knows? Who knows? It's not a technological problem, it's a societal problem, an ethical problem, a philosophical problem. I believe that the aspects of artificial intelligence should be approached very much from a philosophical perspective because they raise truly philosophical questions.